Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 6 of the CameraShakePodcast with Nick Kirby and me, Kirsten Lutz, the photo and video podcast coming at you straight out of isolation into your eardrums. We'll be talking about talk life and knockdown, what's happening in the world outside, and if we're lucky, we'll hit on photography too. But before we get started, please throw us a solid and subscribe to this podcast. And if listening to our super smooth voices isn't enough for you, you can check us out in glorious Technicolor over on YouTube. Without further ado, let's get into it. Right, so we're back, episode 6. How's it going, Nick?
Going all right, mate. It's going all right. I've had quite a busy few days doing our video challenge. So that's taken up an awful lot of time, but hopefully the end result has been worth it. Yeah, that's really been occupying a lot of my time. How about you? How's your week been?
Pretty much the same, really. I found this week's challenge really tough, I have to say. That was really, man, that did my head in at some point.
So one thing that we've changed over the last week or so is the CameraShakePodcast logo.
Yes,
it is brand spanking new and looks slightly more fancy. So that was really cool. Kay, you designed that. Just real quick, what have you changed about it? And you know, are there any Photoshop tips in there that might be quite useful to share?
Yeah, I just changed it because well, actually for no particular reason other than I thought that the original logo that I designed a few weeks earlier wasn't quite retro enough for me. I thought, you know, I kind of in my head I've always had this idea for like a slightly more retro-looking logo, and so I thought, you know, now's the time. It's as good as any, so I just came up with that. It has, I don't really know what the technical term is for these things, but it has little twiddly bits on the outside that so you can use or you cannot use depending on what context the logo is in. So, for instance, if it's on a round, profile picture or something like that, you can leave those out, and it works really well without those. And then if it's on a wider, like a Facebook banner or something, you can keep them in, and it makes it look good. So it's quite a flexible little logo. And I like the vintage feel. And I did design it in Photoshop. You know, I know a lot of people use Illustrator or InDesign or something for logo design, but I like using Photoshop, and it has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage for me is I know Photoshop very well. So it makes it relatively easy for me to use. But it was a fairly quick job, I have to say. You know.
So I assume you put the twiddly bits on a separate layer so you can turn it on and off.
Yeah, so pretty much everything you see in the logo is on separate layers. There's a bunch of stars on the top, and that's the twiddly bits and the text elements and everything. It's all separate, so you can change everything, and you can turn things on and off, and play around with it a little bit. Nice. So yeah, it just gives you a little bit of flexibility when you design something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you never know. You might have T-shirts made with it. I don't know. You never know. But we certainly we use it on thumbnails. We use it on Facebook banners. We use it in lots of different ways. And so it's
up here somewhere.
Yeah, up there. So yeah, it's always a good idea to leave a little bit of flexibility in those things if you can.
Yeah, for sure.
But not everybody's a graphic designer, and it's easy to get hold of some basic logo templates. In fact, I mean, this logo is really based on on sort of a retro type logo type of a thing, So there are lots of stylistically, there are lots of logos that look very similar because they're from a similar sort of time, and you can find a lot of design elements in those. So it's very useful to if you're interested in that sort of thing. Yeah,
cool,
it's very useful to have a look around.
I love it. Looks great. Looks great. Nice little upgrade.
Yeah, it works better than the old one, so it's immediate improvement.
Yeah, totally, man.
Just as a quick recap for all of our listeners and our viewers over on YouTube, every week we set ourselves a photo and or video challenge. So that means we set a subject, and we make a photograph based on that subject, and then we have a look at those photographs, and we just talk about them, and we give constructive criticism, I should say. And the last challenge was a video challenge. So how did that go for you, Nick?
It took longer than I was anticipating it would on this occasion. Normally I'm pretty good at estimating the amount of time, but it did take a little bit longer. What I did in great depth was pre-production. Now, I always do some pre-production, more so on some occasions than others, depending on what the project is. But this one I did quite a lot. And the reason I did a lot was because I was relatively short on time to get it completed. So I needed to know exactly what I was going to do. And B, I knew the style of video I wanted to produce. And that was going to involve lots and lots of fast cuts. So there's going to be lots of different shots that would be required. Now, had I not done enough pre-production and planned out the shots that I wanted to get, I could have been there and go, all right, I'll get this, and then I'll go to edit, and I won't have everything that I want and need to fit. So it taking a long time, but I love doing it. This particular one was really good fun for me. And that's maybe because I'm slightly biased towards video. It was such good fun. I tried out a couple of things and throughout the majority of it, and I actually limited myself as well, quite deliberately, to one specific lens and one specific light as well. For most of it, not all of it, because it wasn't possible for some of it. But where I could, I stuck with that. So I kind of made it an additional challenge for myself. How did yours go?
Well, I was just thinking, actually, unintentionally, I also limited myself to one lens. But it's not, like I said, that wasn't intentional. I just realized that I actually shot everything on the same lens. I didn't shoot everything on the same camera. Mm-hmm. But as far as interchangeable lenses are concerned, yeah, I did shoot everything on the same lens. Mm-hmm. So, you know me, normally when I make videos, I'm quite big on production notes and on pre-production. And I like to really detail everything out from, the main shots, the B-roll, all the other inserts that I needed, and all the other bits and bobs, special effects, sound effects, whatever. I like to have all of that listed out. So then when it comes to actually making the thing, it's just such a time saver. You spend that time planning in advance, and then when it comes to shooting, it just speeds everything up. And when it comes to editing, it's just 10 times as fast because you're not, roaming around trying to find bits, and you've got everything lined out, and it makes editing so much easier.
Yeah.
However, in this particular case, my pre-production, let me just show you this. My pre-production.
A very fancy leather-bound book you've got there.
Yes, absolutely. My pre-production is one page. That's it. That is it. One page. So,
but it may have only been one page, but it got you the results that you were after, right? Still?
Yeah. I mean, I really struggled, though, I have to say. I mean, I struggled. So the subject for the video challenge was a day in lockdown. Yeah, that was basically the subject that we set ourselves. And I found it very difficult to come up with an idea for that. I have to say, I really struggled with that. And so, I spent days and days and days mulling over different ideas. And so, I got to the point where I was going to make a video about not having any ideas for a video, and it was actually, it was my daughter who challenged me to a race, that then gave me the idea, and I kind of thought, well, actually, I might as well sort of integrate that as a sort of main idea, as a core idea, and then build everything else around that. And then from then onwards, it wasn't that hard.
So I toyed around with a couple of different ideas when we first discussed doing this challenge. And my first instinct was to do something in the style of the series 24. And I thought, well, I'd love to do that, but that's going to involve me being in most of the shots to make it feel kind of right. And now that isn't all that easy on your own, unless you're having permanently static shots. And I didn't want that necessarily either. I wanted some movement in there. So then I started toying around with, okay, what if I do it, the majority of it in first person? So the camera is me, and work my whole video around that kind of concept. And I thought, okay, that's a good start. I'd start developing that idea. And then I thought, well, we want to try and keep this around a minute so that we can stick it on Instagram nice and easily. And so I thought, well, I've actually got a lot of things that I want to get into this video. How am I going to do that? What style am I now going to go with? So I then decided I'm going to make lots of jump cuts, real fast moving throughout the entire minute to get it all of the ideas that I wanted to get in there. Not every single one made it in the end, but actually, because I did the pre-production properly after this, I think I only had a small number of additional shots there that wouldn't fit into the minute. And that's only because a section towards the end took up several seconds longer than I anticipated that it would. And so that's the only reason why. So I'm really pleased with the pre-production I did on it, and I planned it out in the right kind of way. So then I've settled on first person, quick moving. I thought, okay, so that's one thing. What am I going to be doing? So I've decided it will be all the typical things that I would do during the course of a day. And so I thought, well, what are those out? And I listed those out. Listed out the type of shots that I could do with that. I thought, okay, well, that's one thing, but I want to bring an element of humor into it as well as a generally, hopefully cool looking video. And so I'll come up with a couple of amusing ideas that I thought I'd film and put in there as well. There was one other shot I wanted to do, which I ended up not attempting because it ran out of time, and I wasn't 100% sure on the way I wanted to do it, which means it would have taken longer to execute. I would have got it, but it would have taken a lot longer to do. And that was the idea of sort of perhaps going to the bathroom at the end of the night, and looking in the mirror, but not being able to see the camera.
No.
Okay. There are ways to do that, and you can almost green screen your mirror to a certain extent and then film yourself. You can mask things out in a certain way, but film yourself with the camera in front of the mirror. You need quite a wide angle lens to do that. My bathroom's very small as well, so I'm not sure I would have got the right perspective. But I would have had a good play, and ultimately would have scrapped it if it wasn't working. But I just ran out of time to spend the right amount of time on that shot. So that's something I'd like to try again in the future if we do any similar kind of video challenge. Yeah. So there we go. That's a general idea of how I got to my concept.
Let's do it! Here we go! Go!
And on today's podcast, we have yeah.
I'll take you down. I'll take you down. Where no one's ever gone.
Yeah.
Oh man, lockdown sucks. We're out of Marvel movies and we haven't left the house in months.
This is so boring. I want to do something fun. We've been sitting here for hours. I know. Daddy, I can beat you in a bike race.
No, you can't.
I'll race you to the bridge.
Alright, you're on.
See? I told you I'd win.
You cheated.
No, I didn't. You're just slow. Daddy?
I found this challenge the most difficult challenge that we've set ourselves so far. And really, it was mainly down to the fact that I really couldn't come up with a central idea for it initially. And because I tend to, I mean, no matter whether I create a photograph or a video, I sort of start from a central idea, and then I build everything else around that. And so eventually, when my daughter asked me, or she challenged me to a bike race, she's an avid cyclist, I should say. Then I kind of thought, oh, that'd be a cool thing to do. And then how would I film that? And turn that into an interesting little sequence. And then, of course, the question then is, how does that fit into the whole lockdown scenario? And, why would you go for a bike race in the first instance? And so the sort of table sequence at the beginning of the video and at the end of the video really sort of just a storytelling device to bind everything together, really. And that's, and I was lucky enough that my daughter, was really interested in being part of it. And, and she tried to utilize her acting skills. So it was good fun. It was good. It's a great fun little project in the end. And it's, we spent about 2 days filming it and then several hours editing.
Yeah.
So it was really good fun. Right. So Nick, did you use a gimbal to shoot some of your sequences?
I planned to, but I ended up not going with it for any shots bar one in the end. So a gimbal, for those who may not be familiar, is Kay, as you once described to me before, it's a steady cam on a stick. And that's exactly what it is. It's motorized, you charge it up, and it gives you those, as we like to say, buttery smooth kind of shots. When I was planning this, I thought, well, I'm doing it in first person. Actually, the gimbal would probably be a really good idea to keep it looking smooth and nice and easy to handhold as well, and keep it looking good. However, when I came to shoot, it wasn't working for me. It was too smooth. It didn't feel natural, and I wanted it to feel quite natural. So I decided, other than one shot, to get rid of the gimbal and either handhold or use a tripod or monopod, depending on the situation. So the only shot I ended up using the gimbal on was as a shot maybe 15 seconds in, where I do a speed ramp around the coffee grinds coming out. And then that was that. Just to skip ahead real quick, after bringing this all into Premiere Pro to edit, put that shot in, I didn't like it. It didn't feel quite right. So I actually went back and reshot that the next day, but did it handheld instead. I'm still not 100% happy with that shot, but it looks a lot better than the original gimbal shot. So, the important, I think, lesson there really is that, just because you have a piece of gear, and I have the Ronin S, it's a very expensive piece of gear as well, it doesn't mean you have to use it. If you start using it in a particular situation, it's not working for you, it's okay to put that away. Just put it to the side and just go bog standard and use your hand if that gives you the look that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Back years ago, I would be intent on using something because I had it. It's just because, particularly if it was new as well, I'd really want to use it. And it's just that you have that gear. There are right occasions to use it, and there are occasions where you don't necessarily need to use it. You just need to know what it can produce, and that's the look that you want to actually go for and achieve.
I always think the question is always like, what kind of what value does it bring to the production? The thing about Steadicams is Steadicams are really, really, really useful because, like you said, they provide this smooth movement. And 9 times out of 10, that's exactly what you want. The only time you don't want that kind of smooth movement is when you want that slight camera shake in there. And maybe something you might want to, display, maybe some kind of, emotional discontent or some kind of, fear or whatever it is, or unease or something like that. And slightly shaky footage might actually help you to convey that through imagery. So smooth movement is often desirable, but it's by no means always what you want to go for when you create a shot. In my case, I really basically used 2 different devices. I shot most of it handheld, actually. And with the exception of the table scenes, which it was a tripod, and then I used a drone for some of the drone shots in the actual bike sequence. The cool thing about that drone is that there's sort of a tracking feature in it that allows you to track a subject.
Cool.
So if you lock that onto one of the cyclists, if you want, then it'll just track that, and because the drone has a built-in gimbal. The movement is super smooth, and it looks very, very cinematic. I mean, in fact, it's smoother than a lot of the helicopter shots you see from way back when. It's really, really interesting the way it works. It's a fun day for us to go out and fly the drone anyway, but to shoot these sequences was really, really good fun.
So you used your drone. What camera did you end up using for the non-drone shots?
So my original intention was actually to use a Fuji for everything else, but one of the problems with that Fuji X100F is, although the video actually looks really good straight out of the camera, the built-in ND filter will only work when it's in photo mode. It won't work in video mode, and because it was such a hot and sunny weekend. It would have been impossible to get some of the shots that I had in my head that I wanted to get, without an ND filter. So for those shots, I used my Nikon.
Yeah.
And I have to say though, given that I used 3 different cameras for the whole thing, I used the Fuji for the table scenes, I used the Nikon for the handheld outdoor scenes, if you want, and then the drone for the flyover shots. I'm actually quite happy with the way that they integrate after the color grading, because that was my biggest worry, was that you have 3 different cameras, they all produce slightly different images, and then in post-production, when you're trying to make it all look homogeneous and you want it to look the same, it's difficult to do, and I wasn't at all sure that it was going to hold together like that. But I'm reasonably happy with it. So.
Well, before we perhaps talk about the camera and lens and whatnot that I used in my video, it'd be good to understand how you went about kind of integrating those shots together. What was your process to make sure that they at least had a similar look to them all? What did you do in post?
I mean, first of all, you got to make sure that they're well exposed. So that's, as always, that's a given. But really, I knew that I wanted to shoot some of the B-roll scenes with a very wide open aperture. So because I wanted that really shallow depth of field. So for that, I really needed to use a lens that would allow me to do that, and that I could use an ND filter on at the same time. So that was the Fuji out of the question for that straight away. So in the end, I decided to use a 24-70 really for most of the handheld stuff because it really allowed me to get the focal length that I wanted to get. I mean, the other thing was that we literally took our bikes out into the prairie, so it was limiting in the amount of gear that I could actually take. So I had to basically fit everything into one backpack. So yeah, that was the process for most of the handheld scenes. There was a lot of camera on the ground and a cycling past it and all that kind of stuff. So that was all. It's relatively straightforward. And for the flyover shots, I shot everything at 120 frames per second for that, because at that point I wasn't sure whether I was going to use some slow motion for some of those flyovers or not, because I wasn't really sure how they were going to come out. And it could have been cool with some of the follow shots, but I think in this particular video, one of the targets that we had set ourselves was to keep it to around about the 60-second mark, and I miserably failed with that. So I think it ended up being like a minute 27 or something long, so that was a fail. But it also meant that I couldn't really have extended slow motion sequences, because once you've got 2 or 3 of those in your video, it really adds to the overall length of it. So I kind of decided to actually speed things up rather than slow them down in the end. But again, because it was so bright and sunny, as far as the drone was concerned, I have a special set of ND filters for the camera on the drone. So I had to basically stop all that down as well, because it was punishingly hot.
Yeah,
it was literally desert conditions when we went out to film that. So, and then I still got the Fuji in for the exposition scenes, like the table scenes at the beginning and the end, just mainly because I wanted to. And the funny thing was, for those of you who are familiar with videography, you tend to, if you can, want to film in a log or at least a flat profile on your camera, and you can do that both on the Nikon and on the drone. So that's the one thing that kind of links those together. When it comes to color grading in post, that's a real advantage, because you're really starting from a really low contrast kind of starting point, and you can build the image up from there. With the Fuji, you're really using one of the kind of picture formats that they, picture profiles, I should say, that they've built in. And so again, I wasn't really sure how that was going to integrate, but yeah, I was really surprised. That worked straight away.
Yeah.
No problem there at all.
Nice.
So it was a little bit experimental, because I haven't really made a lot of videos with the Fuji, and it was one of the things that I wanted to try out.
Yeah.
And also, I hadn't really filmed very much with the drone this year, at least. So I've been flying it a few times, been out just for fun. But I haven't really done any filming with it. So that was just a fun thing to do. Yeah. So it ended up being a really interesting challenge, and like I said, I had a really hard time coming up with an initial idea for it, but
yeah,
it did work out in the end.
For me, I obviously used my GH5S as my camera. I didn't change from that at any point. And for every shot you see, other than a couple which I'll describe in a moment, I used a 20mm prime pancake lens. Okay, and the reason for that is because it goes down to a 1.7 aperture, as opposed to my other Panasonic lenses, which go down to 2.8. And I wanted a shallower depth of field for this video wherever I possibly could. So that's what I went with. I used that for everything, and then because it's a prime, It was reliant on me getting close to the object that I was filming. It was reliant on me to put everything where I needed it to be, rather than having the luxury of being able to zoom in or zoom out. So that was a nice challenge, and I love the look of that lens. It looks different to my other lenses. It does feel ever so slightly more cinematic to me. That could be completely false, but that's the impression it gives me. And that's another thing. If that piece of gear makes you feel good, you're going to produce something better from it, because you're feeling good about it straight away, and it's just a natural reaction that you get to something, right? So that's why I stuck with that lens all the way through it, until I got to the shots that I needed to do outside. And the reason I couldn't use that outside is because I needed an ND filter, because it was super bright, and that you can't screw anything onto the front of that lens. So I switched to my 18 to 35 mil lens and put my ND filter on the front of that, and it was cranked as well. I mean, it was so bright, and I was out in the middle of the day as well, so it couldn't have been more bright. So every outdoor shot is on that lens with an ND filter on it.
Isn't it funny though? Do you remember a couple of episodes ago we talked about what we would put into a bag if we went onto a desert island or something like that, like what was it, the 3 bits of photo equipment or something we would take with us. And the ND filter was very high on that list, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was one of my 3 for sure.
Yeah, and it's amusing, because when you first get into photography, you don't really think of filters in any way. It took me years until I started to appreciate the benefits of an ND filter.
Yeah,
because it never really. For those of you who are listening and you don't know what an ND filter is, an ND filter is essentially sunglasses for your camera. For the lack of a better word, it's essentially a toned filter that you screw on top of the lens, and it essentially works just like sunglasses. It effectively darkens down the image. So if it's really, really bright outside, it's very sunny maybe, and you're shooting with a very wide aperture because you want that really shallow depth of field, then you need to come up with a way to reduce the amount of light that falls into your lens. So essentially just put some sunglasses on. And the real advantage of something called a variable ND filter is in the fact that you can turn the filter itself, and you can increase or decrease the amount of shading that it produces. So you can basically up or down the intensity of your sunglasses just by using the same variable ND filter. They're a little bit more expensive, but especially for video, I really found them absolutely invaluable. It's surprising how little sunlight it takes until you need to use an ND filter for shots with a very shallow depth of field. And
if I'm shooting outside during the day, it's very rare I don't have it on there.
Yeah, exactly.
Very rare.
Yeah.
And it's worth probably just noting on ND filters is that you can get sets of them that will reduce light by varying stops.
Yeah.
But they can usually stack on top of each other as well. I think you can screw them on top of each other.
Yeah.
So if you've got those, you don't necessarily need to get yourself a variable one. I personally do use a variable one, which I think goes up to 6 stops of light reduction, I believe, made by Gobe, if memory serves. But if you're just starting out and you just want to get an ND filter because you're shooting, you're not quite getting what you want, then any cheap one will do the job.
Yeah.
As you progress and you start really seeing what those ND filters are doing, it's worth investing in a slightly more expensive one particularly when it's a variable one. Yeah. Some of the cheaper ones where the glass inside starts rotating and moving together, you can get different levels of light reduction going across that filter, whereas the more expensive ones are a bit more precise and you don't see that variation. It's only when you see them side by side, the shots, you can pick it out. But as you become a bit more experienced, you can see those straight away, and it's not particularly pleasing.
Yeah, and of course, you might say, well, why don't you just increase the aperture and make that hole smaller inside of the lens and restrict the amount of of light that enters the lens that way. Well, and the answer is you could do that. You could stop down to f11 or f16 or whatever. But of course, the side effect of doing that is that your depth of field will increase dramatically. So if you want to get this really cinematic feel where you have a detail sharp and then the background falling off into out of focus, then you need to decrease the depth of field. And in order to do that, you need to open up the aperture in your lens, and that would automatically let more light in. And so therefore, you need to come up with a different way of reducing that light. And that's really what ND filters are very, very good at doing. So, yeah, I thought it was it was a challenge. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges for me in this whole thing, other than coming up with the initial idea, was actually to film under such super monster bright conditions. That was just that was crazy.
So the other thing that's probably worth noting about my video is that other than I believe 2 shots in the whole thing, I used one light, and it's a very small light, and it was this aperture MC light, which can produce, it's an LED light. It produces white light, tungsten, every shade in between, as you can imagine. But the advantage of this is it will also produce anything using RGB, so red, green, blue. So it will produce any color that you want it to produce. So if you can see the blue light behind me right now, just because I've got 2 of these, and one's doing a fill light right now. This one I want to hold up and show. So I've got a different light entirely behind me right now, but this would typically be producing that blue light behind me. The MC light that I've got over this side doing the fill light is producing 5500 Kelvin. So you can see what it's able to do. So for nearly every shot, it was set to 5500, and it has to be really close on a lot of it because it's got a lot of power for the size of it.
And they're bright as hell. They're bright as hell.
They're really, really bright for the size of it. But to light a scene, it struggles. It will struggle a little. So it needs to be pretty close. I had some diffusion on it as well because it comes with a nice kind of rubberized type diffuser to go over the top. And then the scenes where it's kind of it's nighttime. Obviously, all the lights were off. Curtains were down, drawn, and so forth. Needed some light to be able to see what was going on. So I actually set this to somewhere in between tungsten and white, and had that above just shining down. So it gave a more of a glow than anything else. Felt a bit more nighttime-ish. Could have said it's kind of moonlight style color, but it didn't feel right knowing that the curtains would have been closed. So I went with a warmer type of light there. But every single shot had that on it.
The cool things about these lights, I think, is that they're magnetic, aren't they?
To the point where you almost can't pull them off. They're really strong.
Yeah, I love
the
these
magnets
lights.
on the back are astounding. Really good.
Yeah,
really,
you can
really
stick
good.
them to anything metal.
Yep. So the options you've got the usual kind of a screw mount at the bottom. You've got the strong magnets on the back, but they also provide you with like tongue and loop. Is that what they're called? Like Velcro style. Is it M3? The really, really tough stuff that you can stick onto the back and then stick that somewhere else if you want to be able to put it on and take it off.
Is it like industrial Velcro?
Yeah,
That kind of stuff, right?
exactly. I'm sure it's called M3 or M5. I forget now.
Yeah, I think right.
It's the same stuff I use on my pedal board, funnily enough, for my
Same,
guitar. Yeah. The other really cool thing about this was that it's got some effects modes on it as well. So like it can produce what looks like a TV flickering or a light bulb faulty or a fireworks or a bomb going off, explosion, that kind of stuff, right? Probably we'll find a use for some of those at some point. Just an extra little feature. And then the great part about it is they connect to your phone. And so you can, with the Aperture app, you can control every attribute to do with it. So you can change the colors. You can go from white to tungsten to your red, your blues, your greens, your yellows, your orange, whatever it might be. You can change the intensity of it as well. You can turn the lights on and off from it too. And you can save them as scenes so they connect. You can connect multiple. So I've got both of these connected to my phone. And at the time, I didn't have it connected, but now my 300D is also connected to that app. So all I need to do in a typical setup, bearing in mind I've got a slightly different light behind me today, is I can just set these up, open my phone, open that scene, and no matter what they were set to previously, if I used them for something else, they go back to all the settings I need them to be at. Wonderful.
Do you know, I think one day our brains will be connected to our phones. It's like everything these days connects to your phone. It's like, your home, like your, I don't know, light bulb in your living room, your fridge, like everything, your car, whatever. I just read this thing about Elon Musk's brain sensor thing, whatever it is. And I'm wondering, like, whether in a few years' time, you could just have an app on your phone. You're just gonna, feel a bit sad today. Just click happy, bing, and you're happy. Ta-da!
Love it. It's
That'd be great.
Very much like an episode of Black Mirror.
Oh yeah. If I could remote control my kids' emotions, that would be fantastic.
The downside of all this connectivity, if you like, is I was talking to a friend over Zoom the other day, and we just made some really obscure reference to some video game. I forget what it was now, but immediately he was just on his phone at that moment as well, and he's gone onto Instagram. What the first sponsored ad was that popped up was exactly about that obscure video game. That's worrying. And I hear other people tell me the same thing about Alexa with Amazon and Google and all of that. Always listening. Scary stuff.
Targeted advertising.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Well,
But yeah, so just back to these lights real quick. I mean, one more point that's worth mentioning is they charge via USB-C. So there's no need to change the batteries, which is a plus point, but could also be a negative, depending on how long you need to use them for and whether you need them to charge quickly. But they also wireless charge as well. So if you've got a wireless charger that you put your phone on at home, they charge like that too.
Oh, wow.
It takes slightly longer to charge them. So I think all in all, if you charge them through USB, it takes about an hour and a half from flat to be full.
So how long do they last?
About 2 hours on max power.
Oh, okay.
Which, again, for the size of it, isn't too bad. I probably don't get that much more out of one of the larger Sony-style batteries that I have on my other lights. But they take forever to charge. I mean, hours.
Yeah. 8 hours.
Yeah.
But they are pretty damn reliable. I mean, that's, they seem to be going absolutely forever. So
yeah, totally.
They're very chunky.
And they're only they've gone up in price, but I got them only a few weeks ago, and I think I paid £90 each for them, which for an aperture light, pretty unheard of as well. Nice. High quality stuff.
Given the flexibility you have for those, is definitely worth.
Yeah,
worth doing, I think.
Absolutely. And so if you have a look in the video, there's a mimicked Love Actually scene towards the end. They're actually both in the scene. So I've got the 300D lighting the main kind of area. And actually, if you look over to the left-hand side on the ground, pointing up, and over to the right-hand side, kind of on the windowsill, they're actually set to kind of a yellowy, warm type of light.
Oh, okay.
So you can see, and they weren't on max power either. So that gives you, will give you all an idea of the intensity that they'll give. So as an accent light, brilliant.
Yeah.
Second to none. If you want to try and use it as a main light, you're probably not going to be able to do it if you wanted this kind of situation.
Yeah.
It would if it was pretty close. If you were just, doing a vlog or something like that, I think it might work quite well. If it's just out of shot and you're quite close up, I think that'll work well. If you just lighten yourself to be a bit more visible and have a better picture over Zoom, it's going to work brilliantly as well. And anyway, you need to get it in close.
Well, I think it's an accent light, like you said, to light certain elements in the background. They're absolutely brilliant. And of course, I mean, the other thing is, at a pinch, if you're out and you can't really take a lighting rig with you and you just need some light because you might be, I don't know, vlogging in the dark or something, you just want to light your face a little bit.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. And they're tiny too, they're, what's that, 3 inches, 4 inches by 2 or 3 inches, something like that.
And the thing, I mean, even, we're talking about a video really mainly here, but even in a photographic scenario, they could come in really handy, especially, I like those kind of lights when you're taking photos of something very small, like almost like a macro type of situation where you need to light something that's potentially, tiny, then they can come in really handy as well. Or, for effects lighting, great use.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're really impressive little lights.
I love them. Highly recommend these. Highly recommend them.
Right, now talking about pictures, here's a funny thing that I came across this week, and I thought I sort of have a chat with you about it because somebody stole one of my photos.
Huh? Really?
Yeah, somebody stole.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's not every day that happens.
No, not every day that happens. In fact, it hasn't really happened to me at all like this before. But I was looking on a bicycle website last week because I was looking for a bike for my wife. And I came across a picture of myself on a Dutch bike. It's a photo that I took about 6 years ago. And I took it at the time just for fun. It was almost like a self-portrait type of thing because I had just bought said bike from said company. And it was just a little bit of fun. And at the time, I put it on Facebook, as you do. And I think at least for a short while, I had that photo on my website under the the portrait section of that website. And so, yeah, I was really surprised to find myself or a photo of myself on this bike website. And I would have almost felt flattered if it hadn't been for the fact that not only did they have my photo on there, but across the photo, it said, Ben, California. Now, it's definitely a photo of me. My name's not Ben. And that photo was definitely not taken in California. In fact, it was taken in Leighton Buzzard. What can I say?
The California of England.
Yeah. So I found that really bizarre. I don't know. What do you think about that? But, the funny thing about this is, had they contacted me and asked me whether they could use that photo on their website, I would have probably said yes. Because actually I love their bikes. I love their product. So I wouldn't have had a problem with it at all. I would have probably felt quite flattered to be asked. The thing that kind of, that I find weird is the fact that they didn't contact me at the time. And they just try to hide the fact by using a totally false name and location. It's just very strange. I spoke to some friends about this, and somebody asked me, so if you had licensed this photo, how much would they owe you in licensing fees by now? And I thought, well, that's a good question. I might as well find out. So I went onto the AOP website, it's the Association of Photographers, and they have a licensing fee calculator on their website. And so the way photo licensing works is essentially it's based on 3 elements. So when you license a photo, you license it for use in a certain territory. So, for instance, Europe or the UK or worldwide, for example. And you license it for a duration. So that could be for 1 year, or for 2 years, or for 3 years, and so on. And then you license it for a particular use. That could be used in print media. It could be used on a company website or in social media or internet advertising or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you specify those uses. And so based on that, you can then calculate how much the license fee should cost. So as a photographer, that's a really useful tool because if you're ever in that situation, in particular when you work with corporates, then that's again it's a really useful tool to have, because licensing is often something that people tend to forget about. Because you think of doing a photo session and you think of being paid for this particular project. What a lot of people tend to forget is the fact that your photo can still generate income after the initial session. So a good example would be, you take photos for a company, you charge them this much for the company for the photo, and then a year later they decide to use that particular photo for a advertising campaign and put it all over town on billboards, for example. So at that point, your work generates further income for the company, and so therefore you have the right to license that photo. So what you would technically do, or what you should do, is really you should have the license fee component built into your initial project. But so anyway, so in this particular case, given that I took this photo 6 years ago, I just assumed that they had it on their website for the last 6 years, and by punching in these parameters into the license fee calculator on the AOP website, it's really interesting what result I got in the end. So I basically thought about 6 years. It's on their website, so I'm assuming it's worldwide coverage. And again, in terms of use, it's on their company website, and as I said, social media, so on and so forth. So guess what the end result was? Guess how much money this company would technically owe me in unpaid licensing fees?
A few bikes worth?
A few bikes worth, yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm not sure. I'm not particularly up to speed with licensing costs and things like that. I don't know.
So the total came to £15,750.
Okay, it's about 10 grand more than I thought it might have been. Wow.
Wowzers. So yeah, so that's the money that's the sort of income that you would lose out on as a photographer if you didn't license your work. So I highly recommend to have a look at photo licensing. Again, you can go to the AOP website. We'll throw a link on Facebook for you there.
I guess one of the real tricky parts of everything licensing related is how do you know someone has or is using your image without licensing it from you or without gaining your permission? Like you didn't find out about this photo for potentially up to 6 years. What options do people then have? How do you determine how long it's been there, and et cetera, et cetera? Can you keep an eye on all your photos all the time? That's where I think it becomes quite challenging, or you can let it become quite challenging.
Yeah. I mean, this really comes into play very often in advertising, when you're creating product shots for particular products, for example. So in advertising, I mean, it's very rare that images in advertising are used, years and years and years after you've taken them. That's just due to the fact that, you would take images of products that are being advertised right now, So, I mean, that's probably true 9 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
So it's relatively easy to set these licensing parameters. Typically you'd license a photo for a year, maybe 2 years. You stipulate the territory, so whether it's a national advertising campaign in the UK, for example, or whether it's an international campaign, or whether it's something that's used in Asia or whatever it is. And then you define the type of use. So, for instance, whether that image is used in print media, or whether it's used in print advertising, or whether it's used online, or whether it's just simply supposed to be used on the website. And of course, these things can change, and this is where licensing comes in. If you want to know more about licensing and licensing your photographs, then check out the AOP website. So the AOP is the Association of Photographers, and the website is the-aop.org. Just check that out. There's lots of really useful information on there. Cool.
Did you see that Canon released some free software recently to enable a Canon DSLR to be used as a webcam.
Well, I didn't see that in relation to Canon. I did read something about Fuji doing a similar thing.
So Canon, I forget now. Because 2 or 3 weeks ago, they released software to do it. Because normally you'd need a capture card to enable your DSLR to be used in that way. But they've developed some sort of software to be able to do it, so you can just have it for free. And they've done it, I guess, due to the pandemic, so that people can have decent webcam footage. Now, initially, that was just for Windows machines, but they just released the Mac version as well, which is great. You know, not that I use Canon, but I'm on Mac, and I know most people that I know use Mac too. So they'll be using their Canon cameras for that. But I saw the Fuji thing too, and they've just done exactly the same thing, which is fantastic. However, I know you use Mac. It's only for Windows.
Ah, no.
Currently, only for Windows, but they've only just released it. So give them a short while, and I'm sure the Mac version will be out as well.
It's such a no-brainer, though, isn't it? I mean, come on, like using your DSLR or your mirrorless camera as a webcam. It's such a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Why has it taken so long?
I know, and I don't want to go and spend £100 on a capture card to be able to. No thanks. I'm not that desperate to use it, but it would be nice to have the option to be able to use it. So Panasonic, Nikon, pay attention.
You can, in a time when you can remote control your camera from your phone wirelessly.
Yeah.
You can't use it as a webcam. I mean, what is?
Yeah. The next best free option you could do, if your camera has software that enables live view on your phone or on your laptop, is then to screen share that piece of software. It's going to look rubbish, but that's the best you're going to be able to do at the minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. Just a little side that I noticed. Thought it's quite useful to know if you haven't seen it and you've got those cameras. Well worth using it.
That's actually one of the reasons why I haven't got myself to buying like a standalone webcam.
Mm-hmm.
Because the built-in webcam in my laptop is not particularly great.
Me either.
But I'm really affronted by the thought that I should spend more money on yet another external little camera. When I've got a whole bag full of extremely expensive, super awesome pro camera gear right there. This just doesn't make any sense. So, no.
So that said, I have to say I did for the first time buy a webcam a few weeks ago, a Logitech. I don't know, whatever it is. It's about £90.
Yeah,
£90,
and it looks great. I mean, I have to say, it's like the image from your, like when we're zooming or FaceTime or whatever. Your actual image, since you've plugged that new webcam in, is vastly improved. Yeah, it looks so much better.
And now that we're over Zoom constantly at the moment, I thought, well, I may as well give everyone a slightly better experience of looking at this wonderful face. And but you know what I've used most out of what I got with that camera?
What's that?
I'll show you. This tiny little tripod that came with it. It's amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. So now this holds one of those aperture lights as my fill light now.
Great.
It's the little things, right?
That's it, yeah. What really caught my eye this week is that no other than Joe Rogan is leaving YouTube for Spotify.
Yeah, I saw that.
That is incredible. So for those of you, for this one person on this planet who doesn't know who Joe Rogan is probably the world's most successful podcaster. He's a TV personality and a former TV host and martial arts commentator and so on and so forth. And he started a podcast some years ago where I think initially he was just sort of, chatting with his mates sort of thing. And has developed into the world's biggest podcast. I think he has, just to put that into perspective, so the Joe Rogan podcast has 150 million downloads per month. 150 million downloads per month. That is incredible. For some, spoken from the perspective of somebody who's just launched a little camera podcast. 150 million downloads per month is just insane. But, having said that, his podcast has been native to YouTube and, and Apple Podcasts and so on and so forth. So there's the audio versions and the video versions and so on and so forth. And that's all going to go. That's all going to go. He's moving his entire operation to Spotify.
And it was a massive deal as well, wasn't it?
100 million.
Huge.
100 million US dollars. So now this really caught my eye because I thought, well, first of all, why would you do that? What is 100 million is a lot of money, don't get me wrong. That would probably tempt most people, But I just think Spotify, an audio platform. What about all because I watch the Joe Rogan podcast, pretty regularly, I would say, and I enjoy the YouTube video version of it most of the time when I have the time, unless I listen to it in the car or something. But I would say probably the majority of the time I would probably rather watch the video, the video version of it. So get this right. So Spotify are going to build a video platform just for this podcast. That's crazy. I find that crazy. And it's not the first time this has happened. I don't know if you remember Howard Stern a few years moved his radio show to Sirius FM, and it went behind a paywall. And one of the reasons for that was that I think at the time he felt that he wasn't as restricted with Sirius. So, I think he probably felt he had more freedom in the things that he could say that way, and that may be part of the reason why Joe Rogan took this decision. I haven't spoken to him, so I don't really know. But from what I gather, there's a lot of censorship going on YouTube, particularly in relation to breach of copyright. And his content is quite controversial sometimes. And I know that he's had issues with that in the past. So this may have very well been, sort of a motivating factor. And that's at a time when Spotify are very, very heavily pushing into the world of podcasting. So I think they're seeing a massive, business opportunity there. And I've decided to look at some numbers, and you might find this very interesting. So remember, Spotify paid Joe Rogan $100 million, and we agree that's a lot of money. However, within 48 hours of Spotify announcing the fact that they had basically landed this deal with the Rogan podcast, their shares have absolutely skyrocketed. So in 48 hours, they went from $30 billion to $35 billion. So they gained $5 billion in 48 hours, out of which they paid $100 million to Joe Rogan.
Eclipses that 100 million, all right, doesn't it? Seems like a sound investment.
$4.9 billion in 48 hours.
That's just unreal. What's that, 15% increase?
That really explains
15,
everything.
20, something like that?
I would say. So, yeah.
Anyway, I just bought shares on that day.
I found it really remarkable. To be honest, I couldn't really believe when I first read it. But
well, I wonder, given how many downloads he does have every month on Apple, whether those who listen to him regularly and avid fans, whether they'll just listen to all their podcasts on Spotify now. I'm guessing that's part of Spotify's strategy here, is to convert his listeners to listen to all their podcasts on Spotify. Whether that will happen or not, time will tell.
I have no doubt that he will pull some of his listenership or some of his audience over to Spotify. Absolutely, definitely. But the Howard Stern example is a really good example, because what happened there was that he lost a large chunk of his audience in this transition, because he went from a free show to a show that's behind a paywall. So people now had to subscribe to his show, and that lost him millions and millions of listeners. I mean, personally, I have to say I don't really care which platform a podcast is on. I listen to a lot of podcasts on the Apple Podcast platform, but I also listen to some stuff on Spotify. Although I have to say that I'm not when I think of podcasts, I don't think of Spotify in the first instance. So that is, obviously something they are trying to change.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think if they're bringing in video for him, that's not going to stay just him for long. It will expand, and they'll probably start showing. They'll have all their artists' music videos streaming on there as well. At some point, I've no doubt something like that will happen. But with podcasts, I stream my music. I use Spotify. That's where I get my music from. There's a huge argument to say, well, why not just have all my podcasts in there as well that I listen to? But and this is just a slight aside, is I either want to listen to music or I'm listening to a podcast. I'm either in the frame of mind to do one or the other, not necessarily both. I know obviously you wouldn't be doing both at the same time.
How would you do that?
There is a little psychological aspect around it about going to your dedicated podcast app to go and listen to your podcast. There is something about that, particularly obviously if you're an iPhone user or Mac user.
Yeah, absolutely true. So that's it for this week, folks. You've been listening to the Camera Shake podcast with me, Kirsten Nutz, and Nick Kirby. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please do us a favor and subscribe to the Camera Shake podcast over on YouTube, or head over and drop us a like on Facebook. So that's it for today, and we'll see you again in the next episode every Thursday. What catchy riff, eh?